Okay, so what do we do as software developers? We write code. We design architecture. We generally solve problems. But then, throughout all those activities, we talk to people. We talk a lot. We talk with our fellow developers about the code we have written, about the architecture we have designed. We talk to the product and the business about the problem, the solution, the requirements. So, in general, there is a lot of talking in software development. But then, I strongly believe that almost every single developer on the planet read a book about software development, on the language, on how to write code in general. And here I may be a little bit pessimistic, but I think just a few read a book about communication. And hence this talk. Originally, this talk was supposed to teach you something, share how to communicate a little bit better. It was supposed to be targeted at developers. But then I realized that I'm trying to fit a 2-3 days workshop or a full-blown book into a 30-minute slot. So instead, now the goal here is just to make you a little bit more aware of communication, of how it happens, when it happens, and what to think about when it happens. Okay? Here, I initially wanted to introduce myself. And then I realized this does not bring a lot to this presentation. So instead, what you need to know about me is that I read, you already know that, and way too many books. And it turned out that some of those books were about communication in particular and psychology in general. The next thing is that I talk too much, and what's even worse, I don't know when to shut up. And if you need a proof, talk to my manager. He's sitting right there. He will tell you that that's very much true. I think about myself as an average communicator, but at the same time, I believe I'm a little bit above the average for a software developer. And that's why I'm doing this talk. So let's talk about communication. Now, some of you may be aware of the Shannon communication model. It's coming from information theory. It's pretty simple. You have a sender, they produce a message, the message gets encoded, sent over channel, decoded, received. End of story. So now let's translate that to human communication. So you have a message, you have something you want to say, an image, idea, and then you put words around it. So this is what you want to say. Then you say that, or you write that, you send that message, and this is what gets what they hear, what they read, and then they form understanding of what you wanted to say. Okay? But then, what is the goal of communication? The goal is to make the two sides of that as close to each other as possible. So we want for the thing we wanted to say to be the same thing that the other side understood. This is pretty straightforward, right? So let's see how that works in practice. And we'll go through a couple of challenges in everyday software developer job and see how communication manifests there. So first, you might wonder why estimates are a communication concern. And here I'm not going to talk about how to estimate stuff. I assume you have a way to do this. You are able to provide the number one way or another. Now let's see how you can communicate that. And why is that communication concern? So imagine the scenario. Product manager comes to you and they ask, okay, if we have this great feature, when can we ship it? When can we have it? And you say, in around a week. Great, right? Not really, because what they understood is that, okay, this feature will be in production for all the users in a week from now. And what you wanted to say is that, theoretically, if I start working on it right now, and there are no obstacles on the way, maybe in a week, I will have a pull request open. And you probably can see a little bit of difference between those two things. So that's why estimates are the communication concern. And here the goal is to provide a number that will have the same meaning for both sides. And this brings us to the first important thing about communication. Before we communicate anything, we have to understand the other side. In this case, we need to understand why we are being asked about the estimate. And there might be plenty of reasons. There might be a promise made to someone, there might be a market opportunity, or there might be no reason at all. You need to understand that. Once you understand that, you can go to communicating. So, how can we communicate the estimate? And this is just an example. This is a way. This is not the way. But how can we communicate an estimate that will mitigate some of the problems? We can start with saying what will be done. Okay, this is the scope. We can then go from that to theoretical number of developer days. So how much work it is. Developer days, story points, I don't care. Then, and this is something that Rory talked about, the uncertainty, we include in the estimate the uncertainty factor. So how certain are we about the work that we are estimating? How many unknowns are there? So we mentioned that explicitly. And then we go from theoretical to practical. So we join this theoretical estimate with actual developer availability. So how many developers we have, how much time they can commit, we compound the two, and only then we get the final date. So then we can repeat what will be delivered, and we say by what time. Here's an example. The example is just some old estimate of mine. This doesn't matter. The thing is, if you communicate estimate this way, you mitigate a lot of communication issues, because if there is a misunderstanding and someone assumed that the work is well researched and you put an uncertainty factor of like 3 and multiply the whole estimate by 3, then you have to align. If someone assumed that there will be a full team working on the feature and you calculated only one person, you can see that and you can align. So that's it. Now, a small digression about words. Words matter. And I give you a tip here. It's worth educating your peers with a difference between estimates and commitments. Estimate is theoretical. It's like how much time it would take theoretically if we wanted to do this based on our current understanding. Commitment is something entirely different. It's like, okay, we commit to deliver that thing by the given date. Never merge the two. And yeah. Okay, let's go a little bit forward. You estimated, now you go into the implementation. And the first thing you will hit is discussion with the business. And this brings us to the second very important thing about communication, which is adjusting content to the audience. Whatever you say, it has to be adjusted to the audience. The same message sent to your fellow developer and to a CTO will need to look very, very differently. And going back to business discussions, a hint for developers here is that you don't use words like pull request, commit, branch, null pointer exception. They don't care. Okay? That's not the right level of abstraction, unless your domain is very, very technical. Okay. Next thing, code comments. And you may wonder why I'm talking about the code comments if this presentation is not about writing code. The thing is that code comments are messages. They're messages into the future to someone in weeks, months, years from now who will read the code, and you want to communicate them something. And here, you need to make an exercise and try to imagine what information might be useful in weeks, months, years from now. And this is where we have the classic rule about comments, that they should describe why something was done and not what is going on. And here, another small digression. Some of you may know what I am talking about. If you spend countless hours debugging something, investigating, and then found a joke or a snarky comment in the code, it automatically makes your life better, like day better, at least. So if someone tells you that code comments should be professional, don't listen to them. Put a joke or a snarky comment there and make someone's day better this way. The same thing with error messages. There are also messages into the future. You have to imagine what might be useful when this is received, right? And we are talking here about UI error messages or about exception messages, doesn't matter. They are messages, they're communication concern. And here if you have an example, you can say that operation isn't supported. This is true. Like, this is the error. Operation is not supported. But you can also say that, okay, I can't update address on an inactive user. And then automatically this becomes a little bit more better, clearer. Okay, the next thing, breadcrumbs. When we develop software, there is a lot of connected but disconnected things. There are Jira tickets, commits, pull requests, Stack Overflow questions. And my point here is throughout everyday job, try to link as many of them together as possible. So put Jira ticket in the pull request somewhere, put Slack conversation link into the Jira ticket, put Stack Overflow question in the comment, like connect all the pieces of context together. So in few years from now, when you play archaeologist and try to investigate an issue, you have a easier job. Another thing, and this one is a little more convoluted, but whenever you need to discuss something like architectural decision or basically a solution to the problem, you face a choice. Either you write a direct message or you put that on a channel, like that with a bigger audience. And if you face that choice, you can make yourself a favor, put it in a public channel, and then there's a big chance someone will step in and tell you stuff like, okay, we already solved this, or we are in the moment solving that, or maybe 5 people already tried to solve that and all of them failed. Like, you can get a lot for yourself if you communicate in the open. Another thing about building in the open is that our job as software developers is building reliable software. Software needs to be reliable and maintainable. And if you're the only person that can maintain it, it's not maintainable. You fail at your job. So if you do that in the open, there is a bigger chance and less effort to keep people in the loop and achieve that goal. Another thing, you developed your whole software, now you need to release it. And it might be very simple. Release might mean the deployment of a single component. But it also might mean something very much more complicated, with multiple teams involved, like mobile backend, but also not technical teams, operations, legal, marketing, whatever. And if you're lucky, you will have a different dedicated person that will coordinate the releases. But if you're in a startup, you will not. And then it's on the developer to coordinate the release. And how to do that? Just throw a bullet point list, bunch of emojis and handles into the Slack, and that's it. Like, it's not hard. But this is a communication concern. If you need to do this, you need to think of how to do this effectively. Okay? Perfect. So now let's talk a little bit about pull requests, the bread and butter of every software developer. And here, from the perspective of the pull request author. So what is the goal of that person? Is to get the pull request reviewed, approved, and how do we make that happen? So the first thing is to find reviewers. And my rule of thumb here is that if I need 2 approvals, I pick 3 reviewers, especially if the pull request is hard to review. The harder it is, the stronger the forces that make people avoid that task. If you put the big group, then diffusion of responsibility steps in. If the pull request is complex, you will not get your review in time. And so first start with making smaller pull requests, of course, but then it's not always possible. Another thing to consider is to tell the people who will be reviewing your PR when you want it. Like if you have a plan for your development, tell them what the plan is so they can say, okay, I'm very busy, I will not manage that in time. And then you can readjust your plans. This matter. And now let's get back to this making pull request reviewer friendly. And the first way to do this is small. And I will not talk about this because I continuously fail at making small pull requests. So instead, let's talk about how to make them approachable when they cannot be small. Of course, you can write a description of what's happening. Here, what is important, don't write too much. We'll talk about brevity a little bit more later. You can highlight the most important parts. Like if your pull request is big by nature, but not all the changes are equally important, you can put comments on the ones that actually matter and focus your reviewers on those aspects. Okay? If you're submitting a pull request, draft one, the work in progress, then document what is still not done so the reviewers don't look for it if you agree that they review work in progress PR. That's a separate discussion. Another thing, let's talk about force pushes. This will be technical, and I will now go into Git merge versus rebase, but all developers on here should understand what's going on here. So why I'm mentioning it here? Is this a communication concern? Yes, because this is what reviewers see when you force push. There is basically noise with zero information from notification side. Because whenever you amend a commit or rebase your branch, this is what they see. You're producing noise for no good reason. So never, as far as communication is concerned, force push to something that was published to the people. If you want to keep your Git log clean, then clean it up after it was reviewed. Okay, now the other side of the fence. Reviewer. Here, the goal of the reviewer is to get a good review. But do it in a way that does not turn your colleagues into enemies. And the first thing is log upscale level of give a fuck. Not all the changes are equally important, and it is important to say how important they are. There is no standard here, but you can figure that out. Just tell the people how much do you care about a given thing. In the same spirit, there is more structured approach. You can visit the page, you will see all the docs there. But basically, this is a structured approach for labels to the pull request comments that makes your intent clear. So you have labels like need, issue, praise, question. Then you prefix your comments with that, and the intent becomes much more clear. Okay, another very generic thing. Don't be a jerk. A hard thing, I know. I don't comply to that advice. But I try. So whenever you spot an issue, try to think about a solution. You don't have to do this. You may not always have the solution, but it's better if you at least spend a moment to try to help the pull request author. Offer help. If you see that someone struggles for a few days, for a week, whatever, with the pull request, then offer them help, like, for example, pair programming. And show empathy. Imagine that someone spent 3 weeks working on something, and now you're prolonging the review for another 2 weeks. Okay, it shouldn't have happened in the first place, but this doesn't matter. It happened. The person is angry. It does, like the fact that you said, we shouldn't make this big PRs doesn't change a thing. They want to ship their stuff. So now be mindful of that and pick your battles. So try to find whatever is important and address that. Okay, so everyday communication. Now, stuff a little bit less specific to software development that might happen during on the job. So, and I couldn't miss the opportunity to say this: never, ever start a conversation with a single hello. If you need justification for that, go to that page and read the justification that, and never do this again. Okay? If you communicate, you put hello, a comma or a dot, and what you want. That's it. Another thing, be prepared that people will miss your messages, misinterpret them, or basically ignore, or forget what you have said. Be prepared for that. This happens, and this is normal. And you have to be prepared to repeat in a different words over and over the same thing. Don't get frustrated. Just do this. Okay, so when forming a question, how do you get a response? This is a very similar to getting a review during a pull request. So target your messages, explain why you need something, and explain when you need it. Targeting, this is pretty simple. Don't broadcast your question to an undefined audience. Ping specific people that might have the answer. If you don't know who might be the answer, ping your best guess. And there is a chance they will help you get the person that can help. Explain why you need it. If you're familiar with the Xerox study, you know that giving any reason can be completely dumb, significantly improves your chances of success. So if you need someone to do something, explain why you need it. And then explain when you need it. So the other side can respond to that. You can adjust your plans, basically communicate a little bit better. Example, not really important. Now, from the other side of the fence, you see a question or a request and give the let's try to give the response that we would like to get. So if you don't know the answer to the question, but you know who might have the answer, try to help and ping that person. Okay? If you're asked for something that you don't have time, say this. Don't ignore the message. Just say, I don't have time. Sorry. That's completely normal. Then, if you want to look at something, but not right now, also say this. Like, sorry, I will look into this in 2 hours. Okay? So the other person knows and they don't think you ignored them. If 2 hours is too long, they can readjust. If you started looking at the problem and it might take some time, say this, like, so the other person does not do that as well. Okay, so I will skip a little bit. Adjust the tone, like, just evolutionary speaking, people like smiles. Okay, so smile, this will make your life easier. Don't overdo it, because if everything is great, then nothing is. Here, a little controversial thing. I think some messages have to be harsh. It's just that you need to know what might be the consequences and to do this consciously. So don't be a jerk, adjust the tone. Use the formatting options, but this is pretty obvious. If you write a long message, put a TLDR at the top, bolden the essence, use bullet points, make it easier to scan, and don't overdo it, because then your messages start to look like a clown. Okay, now calls versus messages. This is a controversial topic as well. If you ask a standard Twitter user, you will learn that the meetings are absolute crap and we should never do them. The thing is that meetings are costly, inconvenient, annoying, and effective. My personal heuristic, if something takes more than 10 messages, then it should be a call. This is obvious. Okay, do we still have a few minutes? Okay, yes. So let's wrap up. So I don't expect you to remember everything I mentioned here. So here are the few very high-level principles that might guide you in this. So try to understand the other side, to know why they ask for something or why they say what they say. That's the very basic thing for communication. Ensure the message was understood. So it's not, in many cases, it's not enough to broadcast. Like, you have to ensure that you were understood. If you have any hints that someone might misinterpret what you have said, you need to repeat and ensure they got what you meant. Okay? Adjust the content to the audience. That's pretty straightforward. Don't be a jerk, once again. Now, a few words about language proficiency. You need to be understood, but it matters less than you might think. Like, if you don't have issues with communication, then don't focus too much on the language. Even more, using too sophisticated language might make you some troubles because people will not understand what you meant. Brevity matters. The longer your message, the bigger the chance it will not be read, it will be ignored. So try to be as succinct and concise as possible. And especially in code comments, okay, whatever, in documentation. My personal take on documentation is that no one reads documentation. That's it. If you write documentation, there's a big chance people will not read it. If you wanted them to read it, it has to be short. Okay? As simple as that. Communicating in the open, we already talked about that, but this is also resonates with what we heard in the previous talk about reading the mind. It's easier to ignore the message than to play a clairvoyant, a telepath, and read someone's mind. Okay? Communication in the open is not simple, so it creates noise, it requires proper setup, and even if you have the proper setup and culture, then people have a natural tendency for private communication. So this will happen, be aware of that, and try to overcome if you want to reap the benefits. Now, this is a very important part, so I know we don't have time, but all the things I spoke about, they are hard and requires effort. And not every situation will justify that effort. If you talk with my colleagues, you will learn that I don't apply most of those things in every day. So the thing is, I do that consciously. Like when I know that I can write a very vague, short, impolite even message, I do that, and then I pick the tools for the job. And the final one, if you think you know your way around communication, then I recommend reading that book, because communication is very much dependent on the culture. And you will have to adjust for every single region of the world if you want to really excel at communication. This is really hard. Okay, so just a bunch of resources I prepared for you. If you want to follow up on the topic, you can take a photo, but you can also find the slides here. So yeah, you can also leave feedback here. I would be very grateful if you do that. There is a button there, so please tell me what I can do a little bit better, and thank you.